Speaking of which, this guy just walked in out of the shadows. What's going on, everybody? Wanted to put together a quick video because I feel like the personal story of me hasn't been shared on this channel, and I think that from a carnivore diet perspective, it would be interesting to share my journey and just fill everybody in. So I thought I would make a quick video about my experience, why I'm on the carnivore diet, what sort of health issues I've dealt with, and I think that could really help people who are also looking at this as a way to sort of relate to the diet themselves. So without further ado, I would like to discuss some of the more issues that I dealt with. For me, I don't get any money really doing this right now. It's not really a business of mine. I have a full-time job. I work in a company that I started 6 years ago. But I came from a dark place. I came from a place of anxiety and feeling emotionally stuck. And I had a lot of gut issues leading into the carnivore diet that basically were pretty present throughout my life. For me, I was really drawn to YouTube and thought that that was a cool thing to do. And so this became my format and choice for how I could communicate my story. I've always been big about optimization and ancestrally aligning to what is most optimal for humans. And I've tried to stay kind of consistent to that belief and not deviate and really think about how it's most optimal to just live in an ancestral way that's consistent with our sort of beings. So my real name is Kurt Yazija. I'm gonna be 36 here in a couple months in April. I am the CEO and founder of a company here in Austin called Carnivore Diet. We are an affiliate agency. We originally started back in Seattle. I'm originally from New England. I moved from there when I was 7 to Seattle, and I went to college in Seattle. I went to University of Washington. I studied electrical engineering and biology in my undergrad, got degrees in both of those. Then I went on to work for Microsoft, and I went on to work for Zillow, and then I started my own company. In terms of health, my family, my father's side has a history of obesity and cardiovascular disease. I have 4 uncles, 2 of which have passed, both from heart issues. And my grandfather on my dad's side passed away when he was just 48 years old from a heart attack. So my family and my father's side were very much concerned with our cardiovascular health, and certainly being on the carnivore diet and the ketogenic diet has been quite eye-opening and quite paradoxical in the sense that it's a lot of what we've conventionally been taught not to be consuming. My mom and her side of the family is from New England, from the Boston area, and my mom's mother, my grandmother, had schizophrenia and also manic bipolar disorder. So she actually went to one of the hospitals that's very famous for doing this type of research, McLean in Boston, and was treated there. But it was quite an experience having that in the family, on that side of the family. So for me, I come from a side of fairly healthy genes, but I did have mental health on my mom's side of the family, and then heart health on my dad's side of the family. And so that's kind of my background. 2014, I decided to leave my corporate career at Zillow, and then I started my company, Carnivore Diet, and I've been doing that ever since. I've always been super athletic for the most part. When I was in my 20s and even in my teens, I played a lot of soccer recreationally, played in high school, and then in college I played some intramural soccer as well. But I never really took it super seriously, so it was more just kind of a way to sort of escape and stay active. And I got into weightlifting in my early 20s. I have been pretty consistent with that. I never really took it to the real extreme, but I've also dabbled with a few things. I spent about 6 months doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in New York when I was living in the city. I have done indoor soccer leagues on and off for the last 4 or 5 years of my life. Never been big into drugs or alcohol. I did have some brief stints, maybe 4 or 5 months at a time, where I was into marijuana and CBD, and I've been on and off with social drinking. I was a pretty big guy in terms of drinking red wine in my early 20s. I used to work in a steakhouse in college, and when I was at Morton's there as a server and a busboy at first, I just got exposed to a lot of red wine and developed a passion for it and knowledge for it, so it became part of me. Fast forward to the carnivore diet. I discovered the carnivore diet about 18 months ago. Leading up to this, had always sort of had chronic issues with my gut. And when I was younger, I had issues with my acne and my skin. It just wasn't glowing, it wasn't clear. I always had blemishes, and basically I ended up going on Accutane when I was younger in my teenage years, and it kind of messed me up. I dried out my sinuses, I lost my sense of smell, which has not fully recovered. I had to do sinus surgery later on, which I believe was partly because of that. Wouldn't wish it on my worst enemies, but it certainly cleared out my skin. It helped with that, but I never really had perfectly clear skin. Gut issues, I've had those for a long time. Even when I was younger, it was an issue growing up. I would have meals at my grandma's house, and we would be eating the normal dinner, and then at the end of the dinner, I would be sitting there and all of a sudden I'd just have cramping, bloating, gas. I'd have to run to the bathroom. It would be a real struggle for me to deal with dinner. At least half the week, I probably would have something with my stomach where it was just like a stomach ache, an issue, that sort of thing. And so it's always been an issue. I kind of accept it as way of living, but when I got into my 20s and I got into college, I really started to develop an anxiety disorder. And this is really what sort of ultimately led me down the path into the carnivore diet. I had the gut issues and the skin issues, but anxiety was really what I coped with in a fairly, I guess, healthy way by just avoiding all the situations that would have me feeling super anxious. But it got to a point where I didn't even feel comfortable having dinner with friends at a restaurant because I was worried that the restaurant would be too warm, or I'd feel like I just would kind of feel trapped and I wouldn't be able to sort of like escape. And it just became a really big deal that ended up manifesting into an anxiety/panic attack I had, which effectively gave me trauma a few years ago. And that was really the sort of rock bottom period, if you will, of my sort of physical and emotional and mental health, where I just got to a place where I was in a really, really dark place. I've always been a big fan of Tim Ferriss and Dave Asprey and those guys and their optimization hacks. And so I followed the Bulletproof Diet and really got into bulletproof coffee in my late 20s, early 30s. I'm 35 now. And then I even got into Rhonda Patrick's sort of like superfood smoothies with broccoli sprouts. I was growing broccoli sprouts for a while in my own house. I would have kale, peanut butter, almond butter smoothies with cinnamon and cocoa nibs and all kinds of great things like flaxseed and honey and blueberries. And, you know, I'm sure some of this food was okay for me, but ultimately I did find that my anxiety kept following me and it kept being a challenge. And business and being an entrepreneur and learning how to be an entrepreneur and a successful business owner was certainly adding fuel to that fire, and certainly that would have not been, it was not the optimal situation in terms of where I wanted to be. But from a health perspective, I just always had gut issues. And when I drank coffee, and especially Bulletproof, where I'd put like MCT oil in there and butter, I would just get these gut issues. I'd get these terrible gut issues. Most days, my gut would not feel at ease. Fast forward to probably like 2017, about 2017, I met Dr. Paul Saladino, one of my good buddies, who's now one of the bigger influencers in the space, Carnivore MD. And we just became good buds. We were going to the same gym in Seattle, just ironically. We both just kind of clicked. We were both there about the same time most days. We would just chat, catch up. And I started just kind of getting more involved with what he was doing and how he was following nutrition and health. And he worked with me to kind of do my initial labs back in the day before Carnivore Diet was even a thing on our radar for me and him. And we didn't really find anything in my health. Even though I was dealing with this anxiety and these issues, we couldn't find anything really in the diet that I currently had, which was fairly paleo/ketogenic. And we just didn't know what was going on. So we worked together, we did GI maps, urine, blood, basically a full panel just to kind of see where we wanted to start. And we never found anything. And eventually, you know, months went by and I was kind of making some adjustments to my micronutrients, and basically Paul started learning about the carnivore diet. And he was talking about the podcast of Jordan Peterson on Joe Rogan and how that sort of got him on this idea of what this carnivore diet thing was. And then we saw Sean Baker on Joe Rogan, and Sean has been an awesome advocate in this space as well. And we just learned a lot just from the exposure to that. I thought it was kind of crazy, but Paul went in, He jumped in, he thought it was a cool idea. He's got a really big biochemistry background, and he just kind of dove right into the whole thing. So a few weeks went by, and I kept seeing Paul, most days, and kept chatting with him about the diet. And he said, you should do this, Kurt. You should do this. This is going to be great for you. And I was still really struggling with my anxiety. It was basically a chronic thing. I would wake up and I would feel really stuck emotionally and physically. It was very painful, and I just didn't have a solution. I was seeing counselors every week. I was working with psychologists, trying to just figure out if it was in my head or what was going on, why I kept feeling the way I felt. Eventually, Paul convinced me to go on the carnivore diet, and that kind of made the change. That was really the biggest shift in what happened. I started the carnivore diet back in September of 2018, and I'm recording this in the middle of January 2020. And basically, after a couple months of transitioning, almost within I'd say like a week or so, I noticed that my anxiety levels lowered. I was still drinking coffee. I was still doing a bit of the bulletproof coffee and things like that and cold brew. And I still noticed that I still had some anxiety, but my skin got so clear, especially once I eliminated dairy, because dairy was always kind of a triggering food for me. When I eliminated dairy, I just felt pretty much the most optimal I'd felt in as long as I could remember. So I went through the diet and really started it in 2018 and went hard. And I had some tough things I had to give up. I really love dark chocolate and almonds, and I love that coffee and the butter. And all of these things were just delicious treats for me that made it so nice throughout my day to kind of go through the day. And I found that when I got rid of those things, I completely realized how much better I felt. It was like I was snacking on these things. They were my go-to snacks, and I loved them. But at the same time, they were the source of my pain. And especially with dark chocolate, it can be higher in fiber. Fiber was really messing me up in that respect. And I just felt better from a gut perspective without it. As I transitioned into the carnivore diet, I started just journaling and keeping track of what was working really well for me and what wasn't. And I was talking to Paul every week and every couple of days, really. We talked pretty much every day. And I was basically trying to figure out which foods were good, which weren't. He was still kind of figuring out the journey as well. So we were both kind of like on this sort of path of, okay, take notice of what you do when you eat this and how you feel. And so we had some, we'd eat some chicken or some pork belly or some ham and just see how we feel. And then, I noticed I started to feel better. I had started to feel better, and I started to feel more rested the next morning, and I was starting to get a little bit more healthy. 2018, Christmas, over a year ago, I quit coffee. I stopped, and I noticed within 3 days, I had withdrawals from drinking the coffee every day for several years. I noticed within 3 days, the quality of my sleep got much deeper and my anxiety levels dropped significantly. But I still had gut issues from the carnivore diet. I wasn't quite fully adjusted to it, and I wasn't doing it quite right. The way that I was doing it, I was doing a lot of slow cooks. I was doing a lot of cooking in butter and beef tallow. I was adding liquefied beef tallow to my meals, and my gut was just not having it. Most days it would just run through me. So I made adjustments. I got rid of those things. I learned about histamine intolerance. I learned about how to cook my food better. All of these things I've outlined in extreme detail in my book that I have a link to here if you want to learn more about it. I basically went through the foods that worked well for me, the foods that did not work well for me, the foods that were histamine triggering, releasing, and I narrowed down what I ate to the foods that were most optimal. So the diet wasn't always sunshine and rainbows. It was a really bouncy learning experience. I was doing slow cooks, I was doing grills, I was adding oils, tallow, things like this, which were just causing a lot of gut issues. And I was realizing that the gut issues I was having were also triggering anxiety. And even though my skin had really cleared up since I got rid of pretty much all the plant foods I had and I was going completely off the dairy, my gut and my anxiety seemed to be pretty connected. And it was really just a challenge for me to get those issues fully handled. I went through the diet, I figured it all out, I kind of journeyed through, and what I started to notice was that I had linked up with Paul again to do my labs in July of 2019. For the most part, everything looked great. We went through all the hormones, the blood, the nutrients, and we just realized that this diet was not missing any key nutrients that I needed. I was obviously eating nose to tail. I was adding in organ meats like liver, and I had just started to learn about kidney, and I was also taking care of my electrolytes and things like that. But for the most part, I was focusing more and more on just high quality chicken eggs and grass-fed beef, grass-finished beef. That was my primary staples. As I went through this journey, I started to notice when I got rid of the slow cooks, when I got rid of the tallow and the rendered liquefied fat from my meals, I started feeling much better. I started having days where I didn't even realize I had gut issues. I started having days where gut was just so at ease and there was just nothing I had to really worry about from that respect, and that was amazing. That was really the light that just kind of led me further down the path of optimizing this diet. Since then, I've made a lot of changes. I've learned a ton from Paul and all these other people that are in the space about how to optimize it, and obviously it's been a journey. We've just been continuing to learn about it, but I can say with full confidence that anxiety has become more or less just a natural thing, where of course I'm human and I experience it from time to time, but the chronic bouts of it that I had throughout the day that would build are completely gone, absolutely gone. I feel at ease. I feel completely back to a baseline of just being a normal person that wakes up. My baseline is joy. I feel really good. I just don't have those issues anymore. And for the most part, throughout my days, throughout my weeks, as I eat food, I have a really good sense from what I've learned about what I can and cannot eat. And the carnivore diet has been the absolute vehicle for making that change. So I think for anybody who wants to go down this journey, I applaud you. I think it takes courage to sort of make an extreme decision to get rid of foods, to build the discipline to actually do this. But I do want you to know that from my story, having anxiety, having gut issues, having skin issues most of my life, and essentially treating all of those, I think it's a great direction to head. And if you need help, there's plenty of resources on this channel. There's plenty of resources in the interwebs, on social media, on the different Instagrams out there around the carnivore diet. And of course, in our book that we're dropping, you can check that out. I've written in detail what my journey is, how I've done it, how I highly recommend you do it. And so you can save yourself a lot of pain with the way you cook your food, the types of foods you eat, and how they can impact you. So thank you so much. You've made it this far. Hit that like button, subscribe, comment. Let me know if you're already carnivore, if you are considering being a carnivore, if you have a long story and you've maybe done a story or a write-up of it, that'd be cool to share too. So let me know about that. And I thank you all. Speaking of which, this guy just walked in. Out of the shadows.